Welcome into the WalterPicks Fantasy Football Show, where we'll go over everything you need to know fantasy football-wise for every single team. We'll be going over the Bears in this episode. The Bears is a team that I am so interested to see how it turns out this year because there are so many outcomes, possibly a worry for fantasy football. We have so many mouths to feed. Can Caleb Williams in this offense get it done? He had 15.6 fantasy points per game last season. He finished around the QB 19. But we look at our WalterPicks rankings this year. He's going as the quarterback 8. I will get into if I agree or not with that later, but we look at this team in general. They finished 5-12, absolutely way lower than everybody expected, considering drafting a quarterback number 1 overall. When you look at what Jaden Daniels did and what he was able to do with the Commanders, I digress. I'm wearing a Redskins t-shirt right now. That's besides the point. He was number 1 for sacks for quarterback, 68 total. That offensive line was doing him no favors. Whether that was a him issue or not, we can also get into that. But they upgraded that offensive line. They brought in Joe Thuney, Jonah Jackson. They're protecting Caleb Williams. On top of the rushing upside that he does bring, he was the quarterback 8 in rushing yards last year, just below 30 rushing yards a game. I think that's going to continue. But what that offensive line does help is DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift last year averaged 3.7 yards per carry. That was the lowest in his career. He's still 26 years old. The running back efficiency drop-off doesn't necessarily happen until age 28. If you do believe in that, he still has prime left in him. He averaged 12.6 fantasy points per game last season. Another relatively down year for him, RB23. We have him going as the RB24 in the WalterPicks app. But what I like about DeAndre Swift coming into this season comparatively to last year, he led the backfield. He's the clear number 1 running back. We will get into Roschon Johnson later and some other guys that they brought in. But this offense is set to take a big step this year, which means DeAndre Swift will do that too. Coming forward, the coaching upgrades, of course. Swift averaged, again, 12.5 fantasy points per game. He averages that every single season, essentially, of his career. He's never finished outside the top 24 running backs in points per game. He has a high floor with his receiving upside in rounds 6 through 7. I think that's perfectly fine. And you go and look through his counterpart here, Roschon Johnson. This is a guy that I've been wanting to work out for the past few years since he was drafted. He's had the opportunities. RB1s have been injured. It just hasn't happened. He averaged 5.9 fantasy points per game last season, RB56. DeAndre Swift is the workhorse guy here. But then you look at what they did in the draft. They brought in Kyle Monangai. Now, this isn't going to be somebody that takes all of the work from DeAndre Swift. It is somebody that I would keep my eye on for the waivers. We can talk about later. Maybe a super, super deep sleeper. I think he has the opportunity to take on Roschon Johnson's RB2 role. If I would draft him, I would say no. We will get into that later. But then we look at the wide receivers, and this is really what everybody wants to know because there's so many mouths to feed. We have D.Moore, R.Odunze coming into another year. They draft Luther Burton. It's going to be a very interesting situation here. I think Caleb Williams is going to be able to support the passing volume. He was the quarterback 10 in passing attempts last year. I don't expect that to change. When you have more time in the backfield with a good offensive line, D.Moore was the wide receiver 30 last season. We look at R.Odunze, wide receiver 61, 8.8 fantasy points a game. The WalterPicks app has these guys as wide receiver 21 and wide receiver 33. Now, this seems like one of those situations where you're just going to have to pick one and hope they finish outperforming their ADP because it's going to be very hard for all 3 of these guys to do that. And then you also have Colson Loveland at the tight end position, who I know somebody on this show is very into. We will also get into that, going as the tight end 10. I agree with the situation of tight ends where if you don't get a top guy, top 3, go ahead and wait. There's a ton of guys with upside that can prove that value for you. And Kmet, he played all 17 games, tight end 19. I was never a Cole Kmet believer. Even when he was the tight end 1, his tight end upside, especially with touchdowns, is extremely low with all of these other offensive options. So I will open it up back to the quarterback and Caleb Williams. Sam, what is your opinion on this guy coming into the 2025 season?
Yeah, I'm excited to jump in here. I think that before diving into Caleb Williams, I just want to start with the Bears' overall environment, because to me, this is probably the biggest NFL offseason change from year to year. And every year we see this happen in fantasy football where a transformational change takes place and people just don't quite adapt enough. And last year was Saquon Barkley. Last year, Saquon Barkley was going from his entire career behind a bottom 5 offensive line in the NFL, and we all knew he was going to be behind a top 3 offensive line. And for some reason, we weren't taking him with top 3 picks in fantasy football. It made absolutely no sense. Now, I think I'm not going to go so far to say it's that situation here for the Bears. It's not that blatant, but I do think we have the Adam Gase effect in full effect here for those not old enough to remember Mr. Adam Gase. He was one of the worst NFL coaches of all time. And everywhere he went, fantasy football points suffered. And then every time he left a team, the coaching staff that replaced him, the fantasy football points rebounded. And I think we're going to see a situation like that here for the Bears. And we're projecting that in the WalterPicks app right now. We're projecting them for 2 more plays per game, from 59 to 61 plays per game. So that's 1 additional rush attempt, 1 additional pass attempt. But the really big potential shift here, is with the touchdown rates. And we were just talking about Ben Johnson's previous team and the absolutely ridiculous touchdown rates. Well, this team really, really struggled to score touchdowns last season. Caleb Williams was at 3.6% touchdown rate. That was QB 30. I mean, he was down there with some of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL, despite the pass attempt volume, just not a ton of touchdowns to be had. Caleb Williams, the first overall pick in the NFL draft, obviously. And the real thing that solidified this for me heading into the season was the report that came out that the coaching staff literally last season was not even watching tape with Caleb Williams. They gave him his iPad, they sent him to his room, and they said, "You got this, bud." Like absolutely crazy stuff in the National Football League. Like, this is going to be such a dramatic coaching improvement for Caleb Williams. And that's a huge reason why I'm in. I also was a believer in the talent last year around the NFL draft. So yeah, I'm in on Caleb Williams for sure. Right now we have him projected as the QB 8 in the WalterPicks app. So we're in on him in the WalterPicks app as well. And I agree with that. I'm not going to be taking very many quarterbacks early in fantasy. It's really going to be the elite 4, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Jane Daniels. After those 4, I'm going to be waiting, and I definitely will have some teams with Caleb Williams where he's going around QB 12, QB 13 on Underdog and on Sleeper. Caleb Williams right now has been my most drafted quarterback on Underdog for all of these reasons. I haven't been too aggressive at quarterback. I'm pretty equal weights, but he's up at 18% exposure. My next highest is as high as 14%, and I don't have another QB over 12%. So definitely a team that I've been targeting, and that's flowed through to the rest of the team a bit. So I'm excited to get to some of those guys. But yeah, I'm definitely in on Caleb Williams and his potential to take a leap in year 2.
What do you think, Seth?
One of the things I love about Caleb Williams this year is not only everything that has been said about the improvement of this team and the potential and them adding weapon after weapon after weapon in the draft as well, is you look at his ADP. His ADP on ESPN, his ADP on Sleeper is QB 12. So there's a real opportunity in your league that the 11 other teams pick a quarterback before you, and you can just get them in round, you can get them a couple rounds later because most of the people will not be doubling up. So that is another reason why I will have Caleb Williams in at least a couple of my leagues this season, just because he's so far back in the ADP. People are so scared. He will need to improve. We think that's going to happen. But there's an opportunity that you can get him at a real steal. And this is also where I like to do like I have been talking about with tight ends. I like to double up on quarterbacks in this range. So going with like a Justin Fields, going with like a Drake May. There's other guys that have maybe some additional rushing upside or some additional upside, taking a jump forward this year that you can get alongside Caleb Williams. When someone else is spending a second round on Josh Allen, yeah, he's going to be better. We know he's going to be more consistent, but you're going to have those higher level positional players. And just a good season from Caleb Williams will set you up to potentially win your league with the top tier talent you're going to be able to draft since you waited on a quarterback.
Yeah, and to be clear too, one of the reasons I like him in best ball is he's very easily stackable. And like you're saying in season long, I think I'll have a slightly harder time clicking on him in season long. I'll definitely be prioritizing the rushing guys in this range. I still think the price is fair in season long, but yeah, I probably will click on Drake May, Justin Fields, and guys like that over Caleb Williams in season long formats, but still pretty bullish on a pretty big leap forward. And the ADP is pricing in a leap forward as well, just not as big of a leap as I think it should be. He was QB 19 last year. He's getting drafted as QB 12, QB 13 this year, but we again have him at QB 8 right now in our projection.
Yeah, 100%. And looking at the ADP is really what's interesting to me, because yes, we have him as the quarterback 8. I could see him finishing above Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes. That would put him around the QB 5, 6. But you also have guys like Baker Mayfield, who was a top guy last year, Bo Nix, Dak Prescott. A lot of times when I look at these rankings for quarterbacks and other positions as well, it can be smart to go look at odds that Vegas is making. Dak Prescott is one of those guys that is, I believe, top 3 in passing yards projected for this year. Obviously has no rushing upside, but Caleb Williams does have a pretty wide range of outcomes considering the help that he has on the offense. I think a QB8 finish is perfectly in his realm of possibility. And then I'll pass it off to DeAndre Swift. Again, a guy that I think we're expecting to improve. I know this is a guy that I do like drafting this year. Ben Johnson coming to the team. Maybe they utilize more of a two running back system. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't feel as strongly here as I did about Caleb Williams, but pretty much every single player, the projections that I was just talking about flow through to the rest of the team. So we're ahead of ADP in the WalterPicks app on almost every single guy for a lot of those same reasons. And DeAndre Swift is no different. Avery said at the top, he's had at least 12.5 PPR points per game every single season of his career. I don't know why he gets as much hate as he does, but he does seem to be one of these guys that fantasy managers just don't like. I don't know if it's his play style or the tough patches he's had sticking in people's brains, but he's been consistent every year of his career. He catches passes, so he checks that massive box for me in fantasy, and I think that this is going to be one of the biggest offensive improvements we see from year to year. So yeah, I'm in on Swift for all those reasons. I'm not going to be targeting him super aggressively, and I actually do think at cost, I like Roschon Johnson more, and we'll talk about him in a second. But he's basically free, so at cost is saying something pretty big there. But yeah, I'm in on Swift. I'm curious what Seth thinks as well with DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, I think he gets a lot of hate, like you said. I think the first reason is his rookie season. He's coming into this Detroit offense, and he was a first-round pick, and he disappointed. And that just leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. They don't want to pick this guy again. And I will say, I watched a lot of Bears games last year. He has some of the worst vision I've seen for a running back. He just, there's open space and he somehow finds the defender. But with those two negatives said, I am drafting this guy in almost every league. This is another guy that I think can save you, could be a league winner from his draft position. And the main reason being, last year, he was RB23, 12.6 points per game. This year, he's being drafted as RB26, RB28 on ESPN and Sleeper. That means he's going to get worse. I do not see any world where DeAndre Swift is worse. He didn't score that many touchdowns. His offensive line was terrible. His team scored no points. How is he going to be worse this year? So it's another guy that I think at the very least, you get a guy after you've drafted your high upside wide receivers, you've drafted some good running backs. You can draft them straight to your bench in the 70s for a player that needs to get worse to just return value. That for me is the player I love to take in this range, because I could also see with all the improvements we're liking for the Bears that he has a little bit of a breakout and becomes a player that is very, very startable for your team.
Yeah, I like what Seth says about the touchdowns, because DeAndre Swift had a 2.1% touchdown rate last year. That's good for the RB64. I think there's really only up to go from there, especially with the improvements to the offensive line. And then you look at where he's being drafted at around the RB 26, 7, 24. We have him in WalterPicks. We look at the guys that's being drafted around him, above him, Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Walker. Below him, guys like Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren, Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins. If you're taking him as an RB 28, that's behind all those guys. So if you're in Sleeper, if you're in ESPN, where he's being drafted a lot lower, I think DeAndre Swift is a perfectly fine pick that is going to be very hard for him to not perform at least 12.5 fantasy football points a game again this season. But then we go to his counterpart of Roschon Johnson. Is the coaching change going to get him more involved? They went and drafted a guy in Kyle Monangai. Sam, what do you think about how that tandem is going to work?
Yeah, man, I've been excited to talk Roschon Johnson since the second I woke up this morning. He's the only player for me over 22% drafted on Underdog, all the way up at 26%. And a huge part of this is the cost. Everything in fantasy football comes back to cost, opportunity cost, and how much the cost is to acquire these guys in drafts. Roschon Johnson in Underdog drafts right now, I'm pretty consistently getting around 15, 16, or 17. So very, very late in drafts. I think this running back situation is just a bit more ambiguous than it's being given credit for. We have a whole new coaching staff coming in. The only running back added, and I really, really thought the Bears would add a running back this offseason, and they really didn't. They added a 7th-round rookie in Kyle Monangai. The vast majority of 7th-round rookies never score a single fantasy point. The vast majority of 7th-round rookie picks are completely irrelevant in fantasy football. I have no confidence in Kyle Monangai. Definitely an interesting name, I think, to monitor on the waivers, but I'm not going to be, losing sleep over a 7th-round rookie draft pick. Roschon Johnson is the clear running back 2 at worst on this team. I'm willing to throw out pretty much all of last season because of the coaching staff stuff. We just discussed the offensive line, one of the worst in the NFL. In his rookie season, Roschon averaged 4.4 yards per carry. This was also a prospect I kind of liked coming out of college. He's a capable pass catcher. but also, a bigger body back, a little bit of the David Montgomery mold, which is a little exciting to get a potential David Montgomery back in round 14, 15, 16. I think at worst, Roschon's an injury away from being a league winner. And at best, he's got pretty clear standalone PPR value in a Ben Johnson offense that's going to be improving massively. So yeah, I feel pretty good. There's very limited competition unless they add someone else in this offseason. There's not a ton of running backs really available on the free agent market right now. So yeah, I'm pretty bullish on it. Feels like a free pass upside pick to me right now in the late rounds with Roschon, just almost no risk because of the cost. In season-long leagues, we can just drop him after a couple of weeks if it doesn't end up working out. That's the cost for Roschon Johnson right now. So yeah, I'm pretty bullish on him. Definitely curious if you guys are going to be able to talk me out of that, or if you agree.
I mean, you can't talk someone out of a last pick candidate. I mean, like, I don't care who you want. If it's a last pick, I think go for it. And I agree with everything you're saying. Just for me, like, I have this problem where I am a dreamer when it comes to fantasy football. And that's why I like Kyle Monungai a little bit. I know he's a 7th round pick. I watched him do some drills recently. He looked awful compared to the rest of the running backs. But for some reason, I mean, I like that they got him in the 7th round. But I like that, it's for the same exact reason. So I think Roschon Johnson, definitely the safer pick, the higher upside guy. Kyle Monungai will be on waivers in pretty much every single league that you can pick him up week 2 if he ends up working out well. But that short yardage game is going to be there. DeAndre Swift, it's not really his style. Monungai and Roschon Johnson both live in that world. Roschon Johnson, I think, has struggled with some concussions a little bit, which is something that could make Monungai a little more interesting. But I think to start off the season, Roschon's healthy. He does have that pass catching upside. So I think going after one of these Bears running backs with the last pick, especially with Ben Johnson, like Sam has been pointing out, look at what that coaching staff did in Detroit. They built this team for that, and they clearly didn't bring in anybody else. Maybe Kyle Monungai was their guy, and they were able to wait on him, but they didn't bring in anybody else. So if they do want to emulate that Thunder and Lightning, Sonic and Knuckles kind of option there, Roschon Johnson's the guy, and he's essentially free. So I think it's definitely at the end of your draft, if you're weaker on the running backs, or if you have Swift, perfect pick at the end of your draft.
Just quick before we jump to the receivers here, some more context on the WalterPicks app projections. We're really not projecting this huge efficiency boost for the running backs here, and we're still ahead of ADP. Right now, we're projecting Swift for 3.9 yards per carry. He was at 3.8 last year. I think just a 0.1 increase would be pretty disappointing, honestly, for Swift. We're still ahead of ADP on him. And for Roschon, we're at 4 yards per carry. Again, he was at 4.4 his rookie season. So I think both these guys have room to really smash what we're projecting them. And it's pretty compelling that we're already ahead of ADP with the modest projection boost that we have. But I'm excited to talk about these receivers. Avery, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and start with the wide receiver one, which is D.Moore. 13.5 fantasy points per game for his finish last year. That's good for the wide receiver 30. That is a lot lower than a lot of people expected from the year one of that quarterback and wide receiver duo. In the WalterPicks app, we have him as the wide receiver 21. That's pretty much on par with the rest of underdog, sleeper, ESPN ranks. The interesting thing here is the back half, or a back third might be better to say. D.Moore really did start to improve. As far as the target share goes, he was averaging about 8 targets a game. He started to look like that guy again. Now, he started pretty washy to the season. He had a 25.8% team target share. That's good for wide receiver 18. That's not terrible. Anything above 25% is pretty decent for wide receiver 1. His receiving touchdown rate, 5.6%. I think the touchdowns and the offensive improvement will come again with Caleb Williams having more time in the pocket to pass. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I want to talk about all three of these receivers kind of in one go. So we have D.Moore right in line with his ADPs in our WalterPicks app projections. R.Odunze is a bit lower in both our ranking ADPs. We're pretty in line there too. We're projecting him as wide receiver 33, and that's on Underdog. That's where he's getting drafted. On Sleeper, he's at wide receiver 36. He averaged only 8.8 points per game last year after being the 9th overall pick in the NFL draft. So honestly, Odunze too, I feel like Marvin Harrison got all the attention. He was picked just a few picks after Marvin Harrison Jr. had a way more disappointing season. Didn't feel like he got that the attention that maybe deserved. Finished as wide receiver 61 last year. A complete fantasy football bust in terms of fantasy football points. And then they draft Luther Bird this year. Keenan Allen walks, and I don't want to go too deep down the Keenan Allen free agency rabbit hole, but every day I can't stop waking up and thinking, where's Keenan Allen going to sign? Because it might be the Bears. It might be the Chargers. He's still was a pretty significant target earner last season on this team. There's a pretty big amount of vacated targets from Keenan Allen. Last year, Luther Burden steps into that wide receiver 3 role. He was drafted early in the second round. We had a round 1 wide receiver grade on him before the draft. After the draft, still pretty bullish on Luther Burden in the talent profile here. A pretty boom bust profile. I think we had his like range of outcomes in terms of player comps all the way from like Rondale Moore to like AJ Brown. So it was a wide potential range of outcomes for him based on his pretty wild college production, one incredible season and not too much to show outside of that. And also a lot of his production in college was at the line of scrimmage, a lot of manufactured touches, which always spooks people a little bit in the NFL. But definitely there's some real talent upside here with Luther Burden. He's getting drafted wide receiver 55 and wide receiver 57 on Sleeper and Underdog. We have him a bit ahead of that, wide receiver 52. Right now in best ball, it's easy for me to say I'm just kind of taking all these guys at cost if I have Caleb Williams. But in season-long leagues, I will probably take a similar approach. I think R.Odunze is the clearest candidate to take the biggest jump forward, and it wouldn't shock me for R.Odunze to end the season as the wide receiver 1 on this team. I do think that's within his range of outcomes. DJ Moore is the safe bet. Obviously, a bit of a steeper cost for DJ Moore, but we've seen him produce year in and year out for fantasy. We know what the ceiling is there. And Luther Burden's definitely going to be a guy I'm clicking on in the later rounds that has league winning upside. I think of all the rookie wide receivers right now, Luther Burden's probably being the most overlooked, especially as a part of this Ben Johnson offense that could be really, really good at scheming him touches like he was getting in college. And this guy's a freak after the catch, guys. If they can get the ball in his hands, he has that AJ Brown type upside after the catch that we've seen really be a dominant thing across the NFL, from Deebo Samuel to AJ Brown, even to DJ Moore in a lot of cases. So I'm in on all 3 of these receivers at their cost. We're right in line with their costs. I think Luther Burden's probably the highest upside pick at cost. DJ Moore is the safest one, and I think the cost reflects that. But yeah, I'm curious if Seth, you have any hard takes about any of these 3 receivers.
Yeah, I think I'll get to my hardest take in a second, but I do like DJ Moore a lot. I just find it hard to see him disappointing at the ADP. Again, I do think there's some really strong upside here as well. You look at Detroit. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like Amon-Ra St. Brown and DJ Moore, like if you switched them out, they could probably do a similar thing. And you get Ben Johnson running this offense. That to me, that's a win. People talk about when people go to the Vikings offense, they're just like, I didn't even know how I got this open. I think going from a non-Ben Johnson offense in Chicago, which has been terrible, to Ben Johnson will be a huge upgrade for DJ Moore. So I'm definitely loving that pick. I am drafting no R.Odunze. I see definitely the upside there, and the 9th, the draft capital, and all of that. But 8.8 points per game last season, that to me is not, even if he improves greatly, 4 points a game, 5 points a game, he's still barely startable in a lot of leagues where it'd be a good pick, it'd be a good value. But for me, he'd have to improve so much. I'd much rather go with DJ Moore. I still see him as the one. And then Luther Burden, I think one of the things is, just to remind you, the Bears picked this guy for a reason. They saw what he can do. They're not picking players and not planning to use them. So I think that's what gets me excited about Luther Burden. Aside from him having an all-time name right there with Luther Burden, the potential that they have, they drafted him for a reason. We've seen a lot what Jameson Williams has done in Detroit. They used him to run the ball occasionally. They find ways to get him the ball into his hands. And I think with Luther Burden, again, cheap prices, high upside offense, a team that should be a lot better, really creative, offensive-minded head coach. He's a guy that you can stash on your bench for the first 6-8 weeks. You're not going to need him. And then if there's an injury or if he's able to step up, now you have a guy that's really contributing for a playoff push. So I definitely go DJ Moore, kind of sandwich. No thank you on R.Odunze, and I'm back in on Luther Burden.
Yeah, just a quick note on Luther Burden before Avery goes. There are 3 top comparable prospects to Luther Burden in the rookie research we did on the WalterPicks team this year. Number 1 was Deebo Samuel. Number 2 was AJ Brown. And number 3 was Sky Moore. So again, wide range of outcomes, like I was mentioning. But yeah, if what we are talking about comes to fruition, where we see the Bears take a big step, Caleb Williams and this offense overall under Ben Johnson in the first 1 to 2 months of the season, I do think Luther Burden's a pretty likely candidate to start pretty slow and not really be super fantasy relevant till later in the season, he could be a really good trade target as the season goes on if this offense ends up being what we expect. And yeah, Odunze had just 2 games over 20 points last year, way more games than that under 10. So definitely you're betting on a big shift in what we saw from year 1 from Odunze, which is certainly a bet. How are you feeling about Odunze, Avery?
Yeah, I am more on the side with Seth here. I think Luther Burden will become a guy later down the line of the season. Rome Odunze should start as that number 2. But you look at his target share. He averaged just shy of 20% for the team targets, 19.7. And that's 8.8 fantasy points. How much higher can his target share really go? He finished as a wide receiver 61. Now he's going as a wide receiver 33 to 35. That's round 5. And this reminds me of a similar situation here with the AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. A lot of people are in on Devontae Smith, but his ceiling is essentially the wide receiver 2 of the Eagles. He can't possibly go that much higher because we have a D.Moore. Now they bring in a Luther Burden. I think Rome Odunze will 100% take a jump, but in round 5, I don't know if I'm okay with taking that.
Yeah, and the target share for Keenan Allen last year, by the way, this is why I can't stop thinking about where he's going to sign. 27% target share for Keenan last year. That was the 11th highest in the NFL. So certainly there's some vacated targets here. Right now we have the target share projection in the WalterPicks app. D.Moore is at 25%. Odunze is at 23%. Luther Burden is at 16%. We also have 15% to Colston Loveland, who we should definitely talk about next. I mean, they didn't have a tight end on the team like this last season either. So we should expect some amount of targets to Colston Loveland, who was picked well before Luther Burden in the NFL draft. I think he went, 10th overall or 12th overall? He was the first tight end taken in the draft ahead of Tyler Warren, which most people didn't expect. Yeah, he went 10th overall to the Bears. We don't see tight ends get this type of draft capital often, and almost every single time we do, these guys end up being studs for fantasy football. Avery, what are your thoughts on Colston Loveland this season?
I think Colston Loveland is perfectly fine at the tight end 10. Again, ever since the Cole Kmet experience began, I was just not a believer. I think that's going to continue this year. We look at his ADP. He's going as the tight end 10 at ADP of 102. That's around guys like Mark Andrews. It's above guys like Dalton Kincaid, Tyler Warren, Tucker Kraft, Zach Ertz. All those guys below him, I don't think have the same upside as Colston Loveland does, especially with how good this offense should be with the amount of weapons that they have. I think tight end 10 is perfectly fine. Again, if you don't get a top guy in the Brock Bowers, Trey McBrides, or George Kittles, I'm waiting for a tight end 10, 11, 12 in this range. I think Colston Loveland, yes, there has been a stigma around drafting rookie tight ends before Sam Laporta and Brock Bowers, but it looks like that might be changing. So Colston Loveland is a guy that I'm okay with drafting at that ADP.
Yeah, the 3 top comparable prospects we had for Colston Loveland. And I think the player comps is always something I get nervous with, because sometimes we can get ahead of ourselves with the player comps, and we really do take a pretty strong eye to these player comps before releasing them in the WalterPicks app. And these Colston Loveland ones, TJ Hawkinson, Jimmy Graham, and Sam Laporta. These were the top 3 player comps. And there's not very many prospects that were taken with the top 10 pick. That's already narrowing it down to a bunch of Hall of Fame tight ends, Kyle Pitts, and then a bunch of other good fantasy tight ends. So Colston Loveland's in a good group there, but he also produced like a stud in college. He's a very good receiving threat. My biggest concern for Loveland is Cole Kmet and him just still being on the team. I have a very big fear that we see something similar to the Kincaid, Dawson Knox situation, where Dawson Knox, not many people talk about his role on the Bills, but he has a very real role on the Bills, and he's consistently stealing 3 to 6 fantasy points away every single week from Dalton Kincaid, and oftentimes is the guy getting the touchdown. It's not like Kmet is a bad tight end. He's certainly not going to be on the same level as Loveland once he gets up to speed in the NFL. But Cole Kmet was a second-round pick in his own right, and he's been playing almost every single snap of every single game for the last 4 years. He's had at least 7 fantasy points per game for 4 consecutive years. Even if that's like 4 to 6 this year, those are pretty much all points directly taken away from Loveland. I think there could be some really frustrating weeks for fantasy managers with Cole Kmet still involved. I don't think he's going to be fully phased out. At the same time, you don't spend a 10th overall pick on Loveland to not use him, but maybe the Bears will be a little bit slower to give him a huge workload, because they also have the safety net of Cole Kmet, who's been a pretty consistent producer. It's definitely not elite, but consistent in the NFL. So that definitely gives me some fear and maybe enough reason to go another route. If you're taking Loveland as your first tight end, in fantasy football, but I do think the upside's pretty obvious here too with Loveland. So I could be talked into it, but I'm definitely scared of Komet as well.
I like Komet too. I think he's a really solid player. Again, I've watched a lot of Bears games. Komet has definitely won me some fantasy weeks with multiple touchdown games. He's a good red zone threat, and it was kind of a guy last year. I'm like, why aren't they throwing him the ball more? It seems when they throw Komet the ball, good things happen. So I like him as a player, but I'm still all in on Loveland. This is another player. Like the NFC North may be my entire fantasy team because this is another player I don't want to miss out on. If you go back looking at first round tight ends, Kyle Pitts, Kincaid, Laporta, I believe Evan Engram as well was first round. I think those are the last 4 guys drafted in the first round. And all of them were tight end ones the rookie season. Even Kyle Pitts was a tight end one his rookie season. Kincaid, who was not good last year, was a tight end one his rookie season, top 12. And I think Loveland, top 10 pick, I think he fits the mold. I think the risk is extremely low. The chances he's not at least a tight end one, top 12, very low. The chances he has like a Laporta-like breakout with the guy that drafted Laporta as his head coach, that to me says it's a guy I don't want to miss out on it because you look at what Bowers did last season. You look at some of the tight ends that have helped people win leagues over the last few seasons. And yeah, it's been Kelsey and it's been Andrews at times, but a lot of times it's the guy that can find the tight end in round 10, 11, 12 that ends up being the best. If you can get the best tight end from those rounds, your chances of winning the league are way up. And I'm drafting Loveland. And then I will be drafting, since I'm waiting that long, drafting someone like Warren.
I think double tapping Loveland Warren where they're going
all day. Yeah.
Definitely a pretty elite strategy. At least one of these guys is going to absolutely smash where they're getting picked. And just one quick note on Loveland before we move on. He has been recovering from shoulder surgery since the NFL draft. He's expected to be full go for training camp though. So not expected to be a problem. He didn't participate in the rookie mini camp though. Just a short note. We'll see if that ends up lingering into training camp or not.
So for a 2025 draft or pass, I know Seth is saying draft for Coastal Loveland. I would say draft, but not with the maximum excitement. Sam, are you drafting or passing?
Yeah, I don't have a strong take here. I'm drafting as long as he's not your only tight end. I'm passing though. If he's your only tight end, I think that's going to be a tough start to your fantasy season.
I think that's fair. And then R.Odunze, a polarizing guy for us. I'm avoiding. Seth, are you drafting or passing?
No, not drafting R.Odunze.
Yeah, I'm willing to take a stand on this one. I am drafting R.Odunze. He should benefit from all the same offensive improvements that we're discussing. Maybe he was the one that suffered some of the worst impact of last year as a 9th overall pick. I still believe in the talent for Odunze. I believe in the upside. And like I mentioned when we were talking about him, I wouldn't be shocked if he's the wide receiver 1 on this team at the end of the NFL season. That's the ceiling for Odunze. So I do think there's a real league winning ceiling. Definitely some real risk though as well. So I would definitely draft him knowing that. But yeah, he's going like 1 to 2 rounds after D.Moore. I feel fine drafting him there.
So does that mean D.Moore is a draft or a pass, Sam?
Yeah, I would say draft at cost, pass if you're reaching above where his current ADP is. But again, lukewarm take for me on D.Moore. I'm happy to take him where his ADP is.
I agree. I'm not reaching. There's a lot of mouths to feed, but if he's there, I'm taking him. Seth, what do you think?
Yeah, same here. I'm not going to reach, but if he lines up with my pick, especially if he falls a couple picks, I'll be happy to take him there.
And I think the general consensus here is that Swift is going to be a draft for us, so we'll go right into Caleb Williams. I'm drafting Caleb Williams. I think that price is perfectly fine. Again, 30 rushing yards a game from last season. I don't see that changing. Sam, what's your take?
Yeah, definitely there is some sneaky rushing upside. I'm drafting Caleb Williams. I can't in good conscience say pass with everything I've said so far on the show today. So yeah, I'm going to say draft Caleb Williams. And he, again, has been my most drafted quarterback in the 257 best ball drafts I've done so far.
He's a draft for me as well, but he will not be my only quarterback if I do take him for my team.